Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is David Cashman. I'm with SEB Housing. This is the Affordable Housing Information Session for the affordable units at the Val in Billerica. So thanks for tuning in. Goal of tonight is the session will probably go about 40 to 50 minutes. And I will just cover some of the big points about what this opportunity is, how to apply, what some of the eligibility criteria are, and what to expect going forward. Quick disclaimer, I could get pulled away during the course of this. I hope it won't be for long, and I'll let you know if that happens, and we'll kind of get started again quickly. But anyway, so this is the information session. SEB Housing, in case you didn't know, so we are not the development team. We're not the management team. We get hired by the developer to help them manage the affordable program and to run a lottery for the affordable units at this development, and to work with applicants, to screen the applicants for program eligibility, to interact with applicants, to answer questions that they may have, and to kind of help them through this process. Let me start by talking a little bit about what this opportunity is, how many units there are, what the rents are, what's included in the rent payments, and so forth. From there, I'll transition into talking a little bit about what the application process looks like and what some of the eligibility criteria are to get into the lottery for the affordable units. And then ultimately, I'll talk about the next step in this process, which is for anyone who's eligible for the program to move forward in applying for a lease with the leasing office. So let me just start with the first point, which is talking a little bit about what this opportunity is. This is a brand new development. It's a private development that will consist of 211 rental units in one building that spans 6 stories on 4 acres of land in Billerica. This will be a brand new first-class building and will have the amenities that you would expect in a brand new development, which include a garage, a courtyard that features a pool and barbecue and grilling area. There will be a lounge with seating. There'll be a brand new fitness facility with state-of-the-art equipment, strength and cardio. There will be co-working spaces, a library lounge, a club room, plenty of storage, and so and all in a very convenient location in Billerica. So this is a wonderful opportunity to get into this brand new development and to do so at rental prices that will be considerably less than what they are for the market rate equivalents in this development. These affordable units are being made affordable pursuant to a program in the state that encourages affordable housing in private development. So it's not subsidized housing. It's affordable with limitations in terms of who's eligible and with rents that are less than what they are on the market rate side. In total, there will be 53 affordable units. Now, those units have all been reviewed and approved by both the town and by the state. And they've been reviewed and approved to make sure that they represent the overall unit mix in the development. And they've been approved to make sure that they're not all stacked on top of each other, that they're not all located in one corner of the building, that they're not the least desirable units, that they're not identifiable as affordable units from the outside. There's an equitable distribution, and that review has made sure that these units fairly represent the units overall in the development, and that someone walking through the hallways could never point out an affordable unit from a market rate unit. 25 of the affordable units will be 1-bedroom units with 1 bathroom. Those are a little over 700 square feet. One of those units is accessible. There are 23 2-bedroom units with 2 bathrooms. One of those units is accessible. Those are almost 1,100 square feet. And there are 5 3-bedroom units with 2 bathrooms. Those are about 1,500 square feet. And and none of those are accessible units. But as it is brand new development, they're probably all adaptable. Now, the rents for the affordable units for the one-bedroom units are $1,376. And for the two-bedroom units, they are $1,500. And for the three-bedroom units, they are $1,638. Now, this is not subsidized housing, and the rents do not change based on any particular applicant's income. So the rents are the rents, and they are set based on a formula, based on numbers that the state guidelines. That's how we follow those to calculate the rents. You don't really need to get bogged down in knowing how those are calculated, but if you're curious, in a nutshell, HUD each year puts out area median incomes, and there are different incomes for different geographic regions all over the state and all over the country. And using those area median incomes, we calculate the rents such that a hypothetical affordable renter isn't spending more than 30% of their gross income on rent. Again, it's hypothetical. I use that purposefully because the rents don't change based on any particular applicant's income. So these are the rents that you see in our informational materials. And if anyone watching this hasn't already been on our website, certainly encourage you to take a look there. You can just download the information packet or the application right on our website. And that is www.sebhousing.com. The rents, I should note, do not include utilities. So your ultimate, monthly payments will be a little bit higher than what I listed. So tenants will be responsible for gas heating, gas hot water, electric cooking, electricity, water, and sewer. But one parking space is included in the rent. Okay, so you've got your base rents. Those don't change based on your particular financial picture. And then you've got utilities on top of those. Now, if you're curious, the rents do typically change once each year, but they won't change in the middle of your lease. And if they're going to change, you need to be given notice, minimum of 30 days. Many management companies give more than that. They may give something closer to 60 days if you're electing to renew your lease down the road and sign a new lease. So that is just a brief kind of synopsis of what this program is, what the affordable units are that are going to be available. And let me transition into talking about the application process and the eligibility requirements. So in order to qualify, and let me just say too, that if there's anything kind of the biggest takeaway that you can have from this information session is that if after listening to this and reading through the information packet and thinking about it some more, if you think that you are interested in this and if you think that you may be eligible, I highly, highly recommend that you get your application in earlier rather than later. Don't wait till the last moment. The deadline to submit a completed application is March 29th, so we're still a little over a month away. But like everything else, that'll sneak up faster than you think. And if you haven't looked already, the application is pretty comprehensive. There's a lot of documentation that the program requires us to look at. A lot of your income and asset documentation and last year's taxes. Many people don't submit a 100% complete application on the very first try. So it's beneficial to you to get it in earlier, and that way we can review it. And if anything is missing, we'll let you know, and you can go collect that documentation and resubmit it. And hopefully, on a second or third try, you get everything that you need and your application is complete. A further reason to get it in early is, sometimes you submit all documentation that's actually listed in the application. You say, hey, look, I've looked through every bit of this. I've submitted everything that's in there. I feel very confident that it's complete. That may be so, but something that you submit may raise further questions, like deposits into a bank account that we can't track to a job or something like that, and that may raise further questions. And you may have to get some additional documentation to show what that is. So for that reason, for both of those reasons, getting your application in sooner rather than later is definitely advisable. This is not a one bite at the apple situation, so it's not like if you submit it the first time and it's not complete, that's the end of it. Not by a long shot. We'll work with you through the process, and if it takes you 2 or 3 or even 4 tries, that's totally fine. So what are the criteria to be eligible for this opportunity? Well, the first is households have to have income and assets that qualify under the program rules. We'll talk about that in a moment. Household priority for the units will be established according to household composition. That's not so much a requirement to be eligible, but it is a requirement in terms of preference, which we'll talk about a little later when we talk about the lottery. Households cannot own a home upon move-in. Now, you can own a home now, but you'd have to sell it before signing a lease. We'll talk about that some more as well. Household or their families cannot have a financial interest in the development, and they can't be a related party to the development group or to the management group. Now, I don't think having a financial interest is something that comes up too often. I suppose it could. Occasionally, someone will be a related party, and I think often it happens with the management team, which in this case is Greystar, and the development team is Alliance. But if you are, brothers or sisters or uncle or aunt or whatever of someone that works for Alliance or Greystar, that's something you need to disclose on your application. That could disqualify you. It doesn't happen often. Occasionally, it does. So let's talk about the first major eligibility requirement, and this is the biggest one, and that is you have to qualify according to the income limits. Probably comes as no surprise that if you're going to be renting a brand new unit in a brand new development with a lot of units renting for one price, if you're going to be renting it for a lower price, there are income restrictions. These units are set aside for people who qualify and who are under the income limits. If you've already accessed our materials, or if you do so in the future, you'll see that the income limits are listed throughout them. They're in the ad, they're on our website, they're in the application, they're in the information packet, so you don't need to memorize this, and I'll just go through them quickly. But the income limits are by household size. Okay, they're not by the unit size that you might be interested in. They're by household size, the number of people who will be on the lease or who will be living in the unit with you. So for a household size of 1, the income limit is just under $55,000. For a household size of 2, the income limit is just a little bit under $63,000. For a household size of 3, it's $70,650. For a household size of 4 is $78,500. For a household size of 5, it is $84,800. And for a household size of 6, it is $91,100. Now, that is gross income. It's not your net income. Okay, so it's not your take home. It's your pre-tax income. And but with the caveat that if you are self-employed, you would need to fill out the self-employment affidavit and some of the worksheets at the back of the application. And for those, it really is more like your net income that we're counting, because you're factoring in your expenses and your bottom line, what you make after those expenses is what we count. But for individuals who are not self-employed, who are watching this, if you're if you have an employer, you work for someone, it's your gross income that we are looking at. Now, I encourage you, when you're filling out the application, to spend your time looking at the various sources of income, because in this program, we are required to count income expansively. So we count the things that you typically think of as income, which is the income that you get from your job. But there may be other sources of income that you have as well. And those are listed. It's not an exhaustive list per se, but we list a lot of the different things that come up with some regularity in an income table in the application. And the table spans 2 pages, and it's a big worksheet, so you can't miss it. But But don't fly through it. The first thing that's listed on there is your employer. So you'd list the name of your employer, and then you'd list your gross monthly income. But there are a bunch of other sources of income that we list in there as well. And so take your time with those and make sure that, if it doesn't apply, you can just write it not applicable. But if it does, make sure to list what that other source of income is and how much you're making from it. Ultimately, we need to see documentation that accompanies your application. So even if you forget to list something, chances are it shows up somewhere else in your documentation, whether that's in your taxes or whether that's in your bank accounts or somewhere else. So we'll probably see it, and it's definitely just easier if you put it in there. So first question, Stacy, thanks. Hello, thank you for the information. If we are 378 over the maximum income for a two-person household due to overtime, does that disqualify us? That's a good question, Stacy. I don't know if I can answer it for sure without having more information. It's probably the thing that you'd have to apply for us to see. Typically, if we see that you don't have a pattern of overtime, if this is like a more recent thing that you've been engaged in, and if it's that close, we could probably find a way to squeeze you in there. I don't know the extent of the overtime, if it's been like overtime for the last 4 months, which would be a different scenario than if it's overtime for the last 2 weeks. So it may depend on how long you've been getting overtime. It may depend on whether you could submit anything from your employer saying that that is specific to right now and there's a firm end to that that's expected. So I would say it's really, really close. I don't feel comfortable telling you definitely you could be eligible or definitely you wouldn't. I'd say it's super close. So if you're interested, I would apply. We'll work with you. In instances that close, we can probably find a way to make it work. But I think you'd have to submit the application so we can kind of see the extent of the overtime, how long it's been going on, to what extent you're over because of the overtime, or if there are other things. So I think that's a situation where I would encourage you to apply if you're interested. It seems like you're really close, and we want to look at some of that documentation to get a better look. I think we could work with you. So going back to just what I was saying before then, so your employer, what you make at your job, that's kind of the most obvious one, but in this day and age, yeah, Stacy. Oh, so there's a follow-up. So Stacy, it's been on and off throughout the past year. Thanks for your response. Yeah, and so we're not looking at the whole past year either, Stacy. We're looking at a snapshot. So it may also depend, the last month or so, or 5 weeks, how much overtime. But this sounds like a close one, and I would encourage you to apply, and we can take a look at it and work through it with you. Other sources of income that people may have in addition to their job, they may get child support or alimony, or they may get Social Security income or SSDI, or they may have a pension that they draw from. Maybe they get unemployment compensation. That actually, that does count. Not any of the federal pandemic stuff, but the regular old state unemployment compensation does count as income in this program. If you're getting periodic payments from friends or family, that actually does happen sometime. People have an uncle or an aunt who helps them out, gives them, maybe a couple $100 a couple times a month. That's great. We're required to count that as income. Maybe people have assets that generate income. And so we're not as interested in the asset, but if the asset is generating income, we have to include that in the income total. One thing I should say is that there are 2 exceptions to the rule that we count all sources of income for all members of the household who will be living in the unit or who will be on the lease, and that's for minors who are and for any students who are dependents, full-time students who are dependents. So if you have a kid who, you claim as a dependent on your tax return, and that kid is full-time student and they have a job and they make, let's say $10,000 a year, they work a lot in addition to being a student, we only count $480 and no more. It's kind of a random number, but that's the number. So if your kid meets that description, they're a full-time student and a dependent, whether they make $500, $5,000, $10,000, we count 480. So those are the two exceptions to the rule that we count all sources of income for all household members who will be on the lease or living in the unit. And just so you know, generally income, the way we're looking at it is a projection going forward for the next 12 months. And any projection going forward has to account for what you've been making, because what you are likely to make in the next 12 months is best anticipated or predicted by what you've been steadily making recently. And so that's a lot of the documentation that we're looking at. And for that reason, people who have a clear pattern of making one amount and say, yeah, but I'm going to make less in the next year, we typically can't account for that. If there has to be a demonstrated history supporting the amount of income that you're claiming. So just as a way, if you've, Stacy, going back to your example, if you've made $50,000 a year for the last 2 years and you've worked overtime consistently throughout the last 2 years, and you're making $20,000 in overtime in the last 2 years, but you say, but I'm just not going to work overtime this year. If you have a 2-year history of always working overtime, we probably can't just accept that statement. Or in another example, if you said, I made $75,000 this year in my, self-employed job, but this year I'm going to make $50,000, we'll look at it, but, typically there would have to be some history supporting that lesser amount, because otherwise any household who's over income could just say, yeah, I know I'm over income, but I'm going to make less this year, so I'll be under the income limit. And then, that would open up the door too wide for any household to just say, yeah, I'll be eligible because I'm going to make less this year. So the change usually has to have some history that we can rely on to say, oh yeah, we can see that the claim of less income for this year is supported by something in the history. Now, there's no minimum income per the program. Okay, so in this program, in theory, you could make no money and you wouldn't be ineligible based on any income standards in the program, because the program only has a maximum income per household size. So if you're under that maximum income limit, you meet that aspect of the program criteria. That being said, this isn't a subsidized housing program, and households are expected to be able to support the rent on the strength of their own income and assets. And the leasing office wants to make sure that households are likely to be able to pay the rent. And so they'll screen households in this program, same as they'll screen a household applying for a market rate unit, to make sure that they have enough, resources that they're likely to be able to pay the rent. And so they use the same criteria, whether you're an affordable applicant or a market rate applicant. And the ratio they use is 50%. And so that means that they expect an applicant's monthly income to be 2 times as much as the rent, right? So if the rent is $1,500, they'd expect you to be making minimum of $3,000. Now, I should stop right there and say, if you have a voucher, you can disregard this entirely, because this doesn't apply to you, because your voucher will help, if it can be used, will help support the rent. But if you don't have a voucher, then this applies to you. Now, we will also look at your assets. So if you're a little bit under the minimum income requirement of the leasing office, okay, the minimum income requirement of the leasing office, but you have some assets you could draw down from, we'll consider that, because maybe you have, quite a bit in assets that could be used towards rent. and that's a perfectly acceptable thing to do. What that translates to in practice is, and unlike the maximum income limits, which are based on your household size, right? So we talked about how, the maximum income limit for a household size of 1 and for a household size of 2 and for a household size of 3. For the minimum income and assets that we look at for the leasing office, it's not based on household size, it's based on the bedroom size that you're applying for, because this test applies to the rent, which is tied to the bedroom size. So for a 1-bedroom unit, it's about $33,000. For a 2-bedroom unit, it's about $36,000. And for a 3-bedroom unit, it is a little over $39,000. So that's the amount above which the leasing office would require households to make to show that they're lease eligible, which will be step 2, which will be later down the road. And just to be clear, since this is not a program requirement, and that's what SEB Housing does, we're looking at households to make sure that they qualify for the program. We're not screening as rigorously for the minimum income as we do for the maximum income. So if you're over the income limit, we have to look at that pretty closely. If you're close to the minimum income that the leasing office requires, we're not going to screen you out, because that's not a program requirement, and that's something that you'll figure out with the leasing office when you go to apply for a lease in the second step of this process after the lottery. We also look at assets in addition to income, and assets can be varied, same as income. There are some assets that we tend to think of kind of most readily when we think of what our assets are, and those may be something like what you have in your checkings account or your savings account, if you have those. There are other types of assets as well, and just like we have an income table based on the types of sources of income that we see applicants having, there is an asset table in the application that lists various assets that people may have. And so in addition to your checkings and your savings account, that can include things like maybe you have a trust account, or maybe you have a savings bond, or a 401k, or other retirement account, or maybe you own some mutual funds or some stocks or bonds, or an investment property, or whatever. There's various assets, and you just want to list all those in the asset table and list what the value is. Now, we're not interested in like personal property, so jewelry collection or cars or things of that nature, fine china, things like that. We're not interested in those assets, but some of the other ones I've listed, we do need to see information about those. The good news is that unlike income, there is no asset limit. So you could actually have quite a bit in assets, and unless those assets are generating a lot of income, because we do have to count the income that an asset generates towards the income total, but there's no freestanding asset cap. So you could, someone could, in theory, have a couple $100,000 in their bank account. Maybe they're later on, they've worked for a while, but now they don't have much income, so they could be under the income limit, but they've saved and they've got some assets built up. But there's no asset limit that they would be over. So there isn't, so you do need to disclose all of those, but again, there's no asset limit, so there's no, real reason to try and kind of shade or hide what your assets are, again, unless they're generating a lot of income. As I mentioned towards the beginning, you cannot own a home at the time you would go to sign a lease. So it is okay if you own one now, but it would have to be sold before you could sign a lease at the Val. And any monies that you would realize from the sale of that home count as assets. They don't count as income. So if you had $100,000 in equity in a home and you sold it, that would go in the asset column, which again, there's no cap. It wouldn't go in the income column where we've talked about there is a cap. I mentioned that, 401ks and retirement accounts do count in the asset calculation. Again, there's no limit, but if you're wondering, it's the net cash value that we have to count. We recognize that many people who may be, younger, if you're in your 40s or 50s or 30s, you may not be planning on touching that for some period of time. It doesn't technically mean that you can't. There's usually a penalty you have to pay, and it's that post-penalty amount that would get counted. So there's a question here from Matilda. So emergency savings does not count as part of income. Correct. Savings are an asset, so that does not count as income. Okay. So that is kind of a little bit about the income and asset aspect of the eligibility criteria. And I'm going to switch now to talking a little bit about household sizes and the lottery and how priority needs to be given to larger household sizes for larger units. So when you fill out your application, one of the first questions is going to ask you about what household type you are. And you can be one of three types. You can be a household type 3, a type 2, or type 1. Those correspond to the number of bedrooms that the program says you are appropriately sized for. So a household type 3 is, according to the program, appropriately sized for a 3-bedroom unit. A household type 2 is appropriately sized for a 2-bedroom unit, and a household type 1 is appropriately sized for a 1-bedroom unit. And when we do the lottery for 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom units, we do have to give priority to larger household types who the program says are appropriately sized for those units. That stuff is pretty self-explanatory, so I won't spend much time on it here. When you fill out the application, you can just check the box that applies to your household composition, and you'll see, we just list out what the different household makeups are, and they're listed right under the household type. So just as an example, if you're applying as a household with 6 people in it, the program is always going to say that you're a type 3 household, that you're appropriately sized for a 3-bedroom unit. And as we'll talk about when we talk about the lottery, you would get priority for a 3-bedroom unit. If you're applying for a 3-bedroom unit, you'd get priority for a 2-bedroom unit as well. But again, that stuff's pretty self-explanatory. So just when you're filling out your application, check off which household type you are. And you don't need to spend a lot of time kind of thinking about that. Let's talk now a little bit about applying for the lottery and how the lottery will run. So when you apply with us, like I said, a lot of households don't submit a 100% complete application on the first try. That's okay if you need to give it a second or a third try. Well, once you're complete, we'll render a decision about whether or not you're eligible or not. If you're not eligible, unfortunately, that'll be that. If you want to appeal it, you can, but, we make that decision and we'll communicate our reasons. If you are eligible, terrific. And we'll send you a letter that indicates a number of important pieces of information about your application and moving forward. And that will include your lottery application number. So you'll get a number that'll be in the form of A. blank blank blank. The first household to submit a totally complete eligible application with SCB Housing will be A.001, and the second will be A.002, and so on and so forth. And those numbers have absolutely no bearing on the lottery or your eligibility going forward or preference or anything like that. They're just anonymous identifiers to use in the lottery. In addition, that letter we send you will have information about your household type. what size units you applied for, whether you qualified for local preference. And so you want to just read that closely, make sure it comports with what you thought you put in your application. If there's anything that's off, let us know. We can fix it, but definitely take a second to just look at that and make sure that it's all accurate. So the lottery will be on April 8th, 2nd August. So how long does it typically take to get a response on eligibility? So when you submit an application to us, you should have a response within 3 to 4 days on any submission. And so that response could be you're eligible, you're ineligible, or you're still incomplete. And if you're incomplete, it'll bullet list the reasons why you're still incomplete, so you know exactly what's still missing. So the lottery will be on April 8th. It'll be in the same format we're doing right now. Every household who's eligible will be in the lottery. Oh, and I should mention as well, I forgot to mention this, when you fill out your application, you can apply for as many or as few bedroom sizes as you want. So, if you're only interested in a 1-bedroom, you can just apply for a 1-bedroom. But if you think you could be interested in, any of them, then you can apply for all of them. And frankly, it is better for you to apply for more than it is for, sorry, see that my daughter's bopping around in the background. It's better to apply for more than less. So you can apply for all 3, and that doesn't have any negative impact on your application. It's definitely better to be more inclusive than less inclusive, because the only bad thing that can come out of being more inclusive is you just at some point down the road say, maybe you're given an opportunity for a 2-bedroom. You say, actually, I've changed my mind. I'm now only interested in a 3-bed, but that's no big deal. But if you don't note that you're interested in a 2-bedroom, then we can't kind of put you on a waiting list in the lottery for a 2-bedroom. So definitely include more rather than fewer units. When we run the lottery, these lotteries work a little differently than what most people think of when they think of lotteries. Typically when we think of lotteries, we think of, you pick a couple numbers out, you have your winners and everyone else is a loser. That's not how these work. So every household that applies and is eligible for the lottery, their number will get picked in the lottery. Okay, every single household will get picked in the lottery, and every single household will be on a waiting list. And if you applied for multiple unit sizes and were eligible for multiple unit sizes, you'll actually be on multiple waiting lists. Now, you may have different positions on those waiting lists, but you'll be on multiple waiting lists. Now, the waiting lists determine the order of priority for moving forward in the next step of the process, which is to apply for a lease with the leasing office. So it's not like you're in the lottery and then you're on some waiting list for some indefinite period of time. The waiting list is just the way that we create preference and then for moving forward in the next step, which is to apply for a lease. And so when we run the lottery, we'll actually have several different waiting lists for the 1-bedroom units, for the 2-bedroom units, and for the 3-bedroom units. For some of those units, we have to give a preference for households who qualify for local preference. So those are households who live in the town or work in the town or have kids attending Billerica schools. That'll only be for some of the units, not all of the units. And you don't even need to qualify for local preference to be on those waiting lists. But on some of the waiting lists, some of the households who qualify for local preference will have a higher waiting list position than households who don't qualify for local preference. But there are, there are a lot of affordable units at this property. And so I can tell you pretty confidently that if you apply for and are eligible for the lottery, you have a very, very good chance of moving forward and being able to apply for a unit. So the waiting lists, like I said, those establish an order of priority. we will, the lottery will be at 6 p.m. in the evening. Probably within 2 or 3 hours, I will have sorted the lottery drawing onto the waiting list, and I will send everyone the waiting list so they know exactly where they stand. When I'm doing the lottery drawing, you don't know exactly what that means because you don't know what the other household types are and what unit sizes they applied for. So when you're, totally encourage people to attend, and that's great if you want to attend. Okay, I need to take a quick break for just one moment, please. I apologize. I will be right back. Come on. Kate, I need you right now. Sorry about that. Okay, so we will create the waiting list, and when you so when I'm doing the drawing, you don't know exactly what that means because you don't know who the other households are in the lottery. You don't know what household type they are. You don't know what unit sizes they applied for. Still totally encourage you to come and watch if you want. It just means in the very moment, like when I'm picking the numbers, you might think like, well, what does that mean? I just got picked number 1. Am I number 1? Or I got picked number 5. Am I number 5? And the answer is we don't know. We don't know until I sort it onto the waiting list. You don't know and I don't know. But the good news is, like I said, I'll sort it onto the waiting list that very same night. And so you'll get those waiting lists from me within probably 2, tops maybe 3 hours of the lottery, and that'll let you know exactly where you stand on the waiting list. And that's kind of how we transition into step 2 in this process. So I think that I've covered the parts that I want to cover in terms of what this opportunity is, what some of the eligibility criteria are. Okay, and there are a lot of them. So, some of them will become clearer to you as you complete an application for the lottery. Talked a little bit about how the lottery will run, where every single household will get picked. Every single household will be on a waiting list. I'll send you the waiting list the night of the lottery. And then we'll transition into phase 2 of this process, and that's where the leasing office gets involved, okay? And so just be reminded, SEB Housing, that's me, that's the company that I work for. We are not the management team, we're not the leasing office. So we're not doing a lease screening, okay? We do look, I did mention that we look at the minimum income just to make sure it looks like you're close to being able to support the rent on your own. And that's the number that's provided to us by the leasing office. And we do that because it's not really a service to anyone. If, let's just say hypothetically, we have someone who applies for the lottery, they don't have a voucher, they have $500 in assets, and they make $10,000 a year. Well, according to the program, they may be fully eligible because they're under the income limit. They don't own a home. They may be eligible, but they're never going to meet the leasing office's lease screening criteria in step 2 when it comes time to go to apply for a lease, because the leasing office is going to say, hey, we're really sorry, you don't have enough to support the rent. We can't rent you. So it doesn't do us or the applicant any good for SEB Housing to pass that applicant along, knowing full well that when they go to apply for a lease, they may be lease ineligible. But aside from that sort of cursory review that we do, we are not doing a lease screening according to the usual factors that most management teams look at. And if you've ever applied for a lease, you know what some of those things are, but they might look to see if you have any criminal background that doesn't meet their criteria. They may do a prior tenant history, talking to landlords, or seeing if there's anything in their system about evictions or money that's been owed to past landlords, and what your credit is, and some of those other things. I don't know exactly what Greystar will do. I mean, I think those are some of the more common ones, so I wouldn't be surprised if those factor in. But I raise this just because it is super important that if you apply for this program and SEB Housing says that you are eligible, and we put you in the lottery, and you get a good, you get a waiting list position. That's terrific. But that's not the end of the road here. Okay, there is still this other important piece, which is to apply for a lease and be deemed lease eligible by the management team, which again is not SEB Housing. So don't, if you're number one on the 3-bedroom list on the night of the lottery in April, don't immediately tell your current landlord, like, hey, I'm number one, I'm moving out, I'm moving into this new place. I hope you do. Just don't give them that notice yet, because you want to make sure that you are actually lease eligible before you make any kind of permanent plans. One thing I can tell you about lease screening criteria that is a program requirement, okay, not a leasing office requirement, is this program does not allow any co-signers or guarantors. Okay, so if there's anyone who's utilized that before, I've used that before when I was in college. I think I had my parents as a guarantor on my lease. But this program does not permit that. So you just, if anyone's thinking, yeah, I can, mom or dad or someone else can be on there to kind of shore me up, that will not be permitted. And so when you do move forward in step 2, we'll give your information to the leasing office. We'll give their information to you. That way you'll be able to be in contact with one another. They'll reach out to households to invite them to apply for leases. When you do that, they'll probably give you some number of days to do that. And it'll be probably minimum of 5 days, maybe more than that. And the reason for that is there are other people who are interested, and they want to keep things moving along. So you just want to respond to that invitation if and when you get it. You go in, you apply for a lease, and they will let you know what units are available to you. And so just as an example, I think I had mentioned that there are 5 3-bedroom units. So I'll just use that as my example. So if you're number one on the 3-bedroom waiting list, when the leasing office invites you forward, they may say to you, great, here are the 5 3-bedroom units at the development. One's on the 5th floor, there's 2 on the 2nd floor, 1 on the 3rd floor, and here's the 1 on the 4th floor. If you're number one, you get the pick of the litter. Okay, so you can choose from any of the 5. And they may not all be ready at exactly the same time. There could be a little bit of staggering. Oftentimes with new developments, there are. Some units are ready a little bit sooner than other ones. But the beauty of being number one on a waiting list is you get your choice. And then once you've reserved that unit, then the next household would be permitted to choose from the remaining 4 units. And then when that one's reserved, the next house would be permitted to choose from the remaining 3 units until they're all leased up. So you have some agency, you have some choice in the units that are available to you. And so, yeah, and the leasing office can give you some more details about their, obviously development related stuff. They're going to know a lot more about the property than I would, because I'm not on site. I haven't been on site. And so if you have specific questions about the layouts and stuff like that, they're going to be the ones that can kind of show you all that. And, I don't know if they'll be doing in-person tours at that point. They may still be, doing photos and floor plans and maybe Zoom, like Zoom tours and that type of thing, but they can give you the property and unit specific information and the units that are available on your list when you go to apply. Now, and so that's kind of the process in a nutshell. Now, if anyone's watching this and thinking, okay, Stacy, I have a question. My partner and I currently live in Virginia and are moving to Mass in August because I will attend grad school as a full-time student. My partner would work full-time and will be the main source of income. Does us currently living out of state and me being a full-time grad student have any effect? Living out of state has no effect. I mean, you wouldn't get local preference, but there's a lot of units here. I don't think you're not going to, so that doesn't. So let me just say this, for households who qualify for local preference, they may get slightly preferential treatment on the waiting list as contrasted with households who don't qualify, but qualifying is absolutely not a requirement, absolutely not a requirement. So living in Virginia or California or in another country, you can still apply for this opportunity and absolutely be deemed eligible for this opportunity. And you being a grad student, no, that shouldn't have any effect either. So you should go ahead and submit an application. Let me know if that doesn't answer it. I can respond to any follow-up. Going back to just kind of moving forward, if you are able to lease one of these units and you're wondering, hey, what happens down the road? Kind of how does this look moving forward? In this program, you do have to be deemed lease eligible each year. So each year you have to requalify and show that you're still eligible for the program. The good news is you will have already done that process, so you kind of know what it looks like and have some more familiarity with it. So it should be easier for you. But in addition, the program builds in a nice cushion for current residents so they can make more money and still be eligible. So if there's anyone who's worried, like, hey, what happens if I'm living in one of these units, but I happen to, improve my station in life and, I get a raise or a promotion at work and I'm making more money, is that gonna, make me ineligible? And the good news is, so there's this nice cushion involved, which ends up being, well, it depends on your household size, but like for a household size of 1, you can make over $20,000 more when you're going to recertify than you could right now when you're trying to be deemed initially eligible for the program. So, a year from now, if you're in a unit and you're going to recertify, your income could have gone up by about $20,000. You could still be under the income limit. And actually and so that amount actually gets larger the larger the household size is. So for a 6-person household, that amount actually goes up to almost $37,000. So there's this nice cushion built in. So that's about it, folks. I am happy to hang out for a second. I hope that gives you some sense of what this process looks like. It's, it's not meant to be totally exhaustive because we could be here kind of all night giving you details, and I don't think anyone would like that. But I think if you haven't already, take a look at our information packet. That's available on our website. And we try and put a lot of useful information in there. Really encourage you to take a look through that, and that'll give you a sense of anything that I may have missed in this presentation. And the application itself has a lot of important information in it as well. 2nd August, when can we expect the rooms to be available? So that's a good question. It's new construction. Nothing ever gets delivered, or rarely do things get delivered exactly when they are expected to. The latest information I have was that units would be ready in May. That could change. I can't promise you that, but we planned this, lottery, and when we kind of started up this process around units being ready in May and June. So, but after the lottery, when you're invited to move forward, the leasing office can definitely give you far more specifics on that. Because again, there could be slightly different dates depending on the specific unit that you're interested in. Rarely are they all ready at exactly the same time. So before that, I was just saying that, hopefully you got some useful information out of this info session. If you, I encourage you still to spend some time on our website, take a look at the information packet. There's a lot of good information in there. If you find you have other questions that that come up to you, later on, you can reach out to us, you can call us, you can email us. We'd be happy to go through that. Oftentimes, I think households do have more questions as you start to wade into the process and you start to complete a lease complete a program application. You realize you have questions that you didn't even know that you would have now because you just hadn't kind of started to get into it. But that's what we're here for. We're happy to answer those questions, so don't hesitate to reach out if you do have questions. I'll hang tight for just a second here in case anyone does have a question. But again, we're not going anywhere. So if you think of something in a week or a month from now, you can just give us a call or shoot us a line, and we'll be happy to work through it with you. So yep, I'm going to just hang out for a sec, see if anyone has any questions. But thank you all again for attending. Sorry again about the brief interruption there, and I hope this was somewhat helpful. All right, I don't see any questions, so thank you everyone for attending, and I hope everyone has a great night, and hope to see your applications sometime soon. So thanks again, everyone. Take care. Oh, great. Thank you. All right, bye everyone.